Open up to Philippians chapter 1. Philippians chapter 1, that's where we were Sunday morning. And Sunday morning we talked about goals. And we talked about, as Paul is writing to the church here in Philippi, to the Philippians, it's the church that we see started. It's a church plant that we actually can find in Acts chapter 16. Conversation is started with Paul and a lady named Lydia, and it continues on to where a demon is cast out. And then as Acts chapter 16 continues on, we see Paul in prison. The Bible says that they brought him before the magistrate because he was doing things in manners and custom and ways that were not in agreement with that Roman government. And so Paul is thrown in prison again, which is unique because prison is where this church was started. And so prison is where the church was started in Acts chapter 16. Because if you remember, as they're locked up around midnight, they began to sing, and their chains were loose. And the keeper of that prison had his sword and was about to take his own life because obviously he's in charge of all those prisoners. And Paul says, "Hey, we're here. Don't kill yourself." And that man actually gets saved, and that's the start of the church that he is now writing to later here in the book of Philippians. And we said Sunday morning that Paul, he gets the greeting out of the way in 7 verses and gets right to his charge. And his charge was to set goals. We said that Paul said, hey, it's his first written communication with this new church. And he's telling them some things that they need to do. And he said, number one, you need to have a deeper relationship. I'm glad you're in. I'm glad you believe. But don't stop there. Get rooted. Dig in and grow. His goal for them was a deeper relationship. We also said his goal was a distinct resolution. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 10, it says that you may approve the things that are excellent. In other words, we talked about setting a standard that was higher than we could actually attain to inspire us to do our best, to do better than we would. Then we said, why do those things? Because there's a divine reason. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 10, the very end, it says this, till the day of Christ. And we said one day we want to stand before him. So we should have a divine reason to set these goals. And then in number 4, we said that he had a desire. He wanted to see their desires reversed. In verse 11, it said, being filled with the fruits of righteousness. And we talked about the world and wants to fill us with things. The world, the things that we see, the things that we take in, the things that we read, it's all to fill us, right? The world thinks that we're empty, and we need either an entertainment or something in our life to bring something in. We need to be filled with all of those things. And Paul said, no, we need to be filled with the fruit of the righteousness, which is pursuing Christ's likeness. We said what he's talking about in context is the pursuit of Christ's likeness. So we talked about goals. And I like this. I like the book of Philippians. As soon as he wraps up talking about goals, in verse 11, he then goes to detours. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is detours. And, me and Donnie, we experienced some detours. There's a new church plant that Johannes and Mary Beth went to church with a man named Steve Ashley. And he's the one that discipled Johannes and took him under his wings and taught him a lot about the Bible. Well, this man is starting a church right at the Virginia border. And we took 77. Obviously, that was the only way. But we experienced some detours. On the way down, there was a detour. And then on the way coming back, that first tunnel that you come to, there's a detour now. It's only one lane. And man, that traffic was backed up. Forever. And then we get in, and right before the toll booth, right before the very first toll, right there where the ski resort is, there's another detour right now. A lot of work. And I'll tell you what, detours are frustrating, are they not? Not only in traffic, but in life. Has life ever thrown you a detour? You were thrown a detour, right, Claire? That you weren't expecting that to be in your life at this phase. Nobody expects that to be happening. We were praying for Cindy Buckner. Cindy is in her 50s, and she's at the hospice house. And for Kevin and Ashley and Grant, that's a detour. That is a road that they did not think they would be traveling, but they are. But if you haven't found out yet, life is going to have detours. And I love how the Apostle Paul, as he's talking to this church that's growing, as it's budding, he's giving them an instruction. He starts out, these are the goals you're to have. Then he gets right into, oh, by the way, there's going to be some detours. We're going to have detours. Some of them we cause upon ourselves. Some of them we bring. Some of them are God ordained. Some of them are planned. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. So we know that God has ordered our steps, so we have this. And what we get, and know this, in life, what we do during our detours will determine whether or not we reach our goals. Think about that. Sunday morning we talked about Paul wants this church to set goals. I said that's applicable to us. We are the church. We should set these goals. What we do in the detour times in life will make or break our goals. And Paul is trying to tell them this. What we do during a detour. You see, a detour is inconvenience, right? But if we just stay true and we stay right on that detour, guess what? We're going to be back on the path that we were supposed to be, that we wanted to have, that was ordained for us to walk in, to drive in all along. But sometimes you run into a guy like me. Okay? They're closing down at Big Chimney. Oh, what in the world? You ever see those median marks, where somebody has driven a truck through the median and went back the other way? That's me. Nope, see it? All right, four-wheel drive. Let's cut through the median, and I'm going to go back to Nick Scholl's and take a 119 all the way. Anybody else raise their hand brave enough to say they've taken a detour like that? So sometimes, right, we don't want to take the detour. Why? Because it's an inconvenience to us. It's something that we didn't plan. It's something that we don't want. It's something that we weren't expecting. Sometimes we want to bail. I'm glad that we can read detours that were had. I love to read the story of Joseph. And you learn all that happened to him, formed him, and made him into the leader that he was to be. If it wasn't for his brothers despising him, if it wasn't for being cast into the pit, if it wasn't for being sold into slavery, if it wasn't for Potiphar's wife making false allegations against him, if it wasn't for that prison sentence, if it wasn't for all of those situations, he would not have become the person. He had some detours. The plan was revealed to him in the very beginning, was it not? Through a dream. But there was going to be some detours. In life, we're going to have detours. And Paul is telling this new church, hey, you are going to have some detours, some difficulties, some valley experiences. During this time, isn't it good to know that God's in control? Sometimes you'll be in a detour at night. And isn't it good when they've got that car in front of you with the flashing lights, that pilot car, that one that you can follow so you'll know exactly where you're going, especially if you're in an area you're unfamiliar with? Isn't it good to know that God is in control, even when it is a detour to us? God has a plan, and God is in control. And the question arises then as we're pursuing the goals that's laid out for us in verses 8 through 11. Are we willing to experience anything and everything along the way to achieve those goals? Detours. Let's read at verse 12. Philippians chapter 1. We ended Sunday with verse 11, and we'll continue on with verse 12. But I would ye should understand, brethren, that the things which happened unto me have fallen out. In other words, have come to further. Come to further what? They have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel. He says, these things that have happened unto me have actually furthered the gospel. And we'll find out what things. So that my bonds He is in custody. He is in chains right now. So that my bonds in Christ are manifest in all the palace and in all other places. And many of the brethren in the Lord, waxing confident by my bonds. He's saying, and there's people that are growing stronger now because of these bonds that I now have. They are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ, even of envy and strife, and some also of goodwill. The one preached Christ of contention, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my bonds, but the other of love, knowing that I am set for the defense of the gospel. Right after Paul gives this new church some goals, he lets them know detours will be on your route. Unplanned circumstances will be on your route. So be prepared. He has to address this issue. What issue? The Christian life is not an easy life. We weren't promised the smooth sailing, right? We've heard that cliched statement, only arriving safely at our destination. We understand that. The Christian life is not going to be easy. I like how Paul is claiming the same verse that he wrote that went out before him, the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 28. He says this, that he knows that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are the called according to his purpose. And that is his thought as he's penning these words, talking about his own personal detour. Look at verse 12 again. We're going to talk about this. But I would ye should understand, brethren, that the things, a lot of things are going to happen to us in life. Financial things, physical things, family things. He says, but he wants to talk about the things that are happening to him. See, we learn things in detours. I remember once, and I don't remember what state I was in traveling, but I remember I was off the interstate, and I was taking a detour through this beautiful country-type setting that I had never seen, never heard of, never been through, and it went on forever. I believe it was on one of the trips I was taking teenagers probably 5 years ago, or probably around Arkansas, Missouri kind of area there while visiting a college or something. But if it wasn't for that detour, there was a lot of things that I would have never experienced. We saw a lot of agriculture, a lot of things that we don't see here, that we don't experience here, and I would have never seen those things without a detour. So Paul is saying some things have happened to me, but he says there are some things that I've gained from this detour, and you will always gain something from these spiritual detours in our lives. Number one, Paul says that he gained a new awareness. He gained a new awareness. He says, hey, man, here I am again. I'm preaching the gospel. I'm doing what's right again. I'm believing in God. I'm having faith in him. And here I am, chained to a guard. Chained to a Roman prison guard. Again, the first time we met, it started out awesome. I met a lady who talked about the gospel. I helped another lady out. Next thing I know, I'm in jail. Well, here I am again. These things are happening. But he says something made me just realize something. I was just made aware of something. He says, while I was here, what's happened to me has actually grown the gospel. Sometimes in our detours, we need to stop and look. And Paul says, man, I've gained a new awareness of some things. While God has me in this chapter right now, a chapter I never thought I'd be in my life, I'm here. But it's actually made me aware of some things. He said there's a new awareness. You know, we all want the mountaintop experiences in life. Do we not? We like the mountaintop experiences. We like the good things. We like the enjoyable things. But you know, I was reading something just today that said, hey, have you realized that nothing ever grows on top of a mountain? The things that grow are growing in the valley. We like the mountaintop, but the things that are growing grow in the valley. And the same is true with us. Who we are is directly tied into our circumstances and our experience. And that is what has made us who we are and given us our drive and has given us our resolve. Oftentimes our faith is forged in the valley. Oftentimes it was the difficulties and the tough times that made us realize that God truly is an ever-present help in a time of trouble. It's the difficult times that then we realize that He is a friend that is closer than any brother. It's the difficult times and the times that we were unexpected times that we didn't want at the beginning, but then we realize that He is our God, that He is a light into our path, that He is our strength. And so it's at times like that, oftentimes detours make us more aware of who we are and more aware of what is going on around us. Paul has realized that what he thought was a problem has actually become an opportunity. In verse 12 he says, man, here I am again. I'm locked up and a light bulb hits. But you know what? It's actually fueled the furtherance of the gospel. The things that happen to me are part of God's plan. That's what he's saying. The things that are happening to me are part of God's plan. Are we aware? Maybe you're going through a detour season right now. Maybe you've just come out of one. I bet you it made you aware of a few things. I like what Isaiah 58:11 says. It says, and the Lord shall guide thee continually. Continually. It doesn't say the Lord shall guide you when you're here Sunday morning and Sunday night and Wednesday night and you're working in Judgment House and maybe you teach a Sunday school class and you're saying your prayers and everything's good. No. It says that God is there to guide us continually. So the God of that path that He's illuminating is also the God of the detours. And so we're truly never alone. Isaiah says, and the Lord shall guide thee continually and satisfy thy soul in drought. In those times that you don't have what you think that you need, when it wasn't the direction that you wanted to go, when you have questions, the Bible says, He'll satisfy us. Make fat thy bones, and thou shalt be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose water fail not. Because we trust that God is guiding us. Isaiah says, He guides you continually. Through mountaintop experiences, through valley experiences, God guides and God provides. Proverbs 16:9, a man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. Psalms 32:8, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way that thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. Say, what are we talking about? There are detours in life. You have had goals, some physical, some spiritual. You have had detours, some physical, some spiritual. But it's the same God. The God of the valley is the God of the mountaintop. He will guide us, not just on the good days, not just on the perfect days, but in all days. So Paul says this detour, number one, gave me a new awareness. Number two, it gave me new access. And this is really cool. He says it gave me new access. Look at verse 13. Philippians chapter 1, verse 13. So that my bonds in Christ are manifest in all the palace and in all other places. Think about this. You ever read a verse and you say, what in the world is this talking about? This is maybe one of those if you look over it. But what he's saying is his restraints have actually allowed him to go places that he wouldn't have been able to go before. When you study this out, the imprisonment that Paul has experienced in Philippians chapter 1, he has a long chain linked to a government official. So everywhere that man goes, he has to take this preacher, Paul. He's got to take him. Paul would have never had the opportunity to be in a palace. He says in all these other places. Paul is learning that sometimes God has detours in our lives, but they're not all bad. He's become aware of it, and now things are illuminated. He's looking, he's saying, wow, what a blessing. Because now, here I am in the palace. And you know what he did there? This is really, really awesome. Turn over a few pages to Philippians chapter 4. Turn over real quick. I want you to see this. Philippians chapter 4. We'll see the results of Paul being in these bonds and going to palaces and other places. Look at Philippians chapter 4. He's closing the letter and he's saying goodbye to a crowd that you would have never imagined. Look at Philippians chapter 4, verse 22. Look at verse 21. So he's wrapping it up. He says, now glory to God and our Father. Then verse 21, salute every saint in Christ Jesus. The brethren which are with me greet you. Then look what he says in 22. All the saints salute you chiefly. They that are of Caesar's household. Think about that. You know what that is telling me? Is that Paul sees the opportunity, being in bonds to the man he was assigned to, and while in the palace and all the other places, people couldn't help but see Jesus Christ, the hope of glory, in Paul. And people evidently began to talk. And people in Caesar's own household came to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. That's his words. He says, and those that are in Caesar's household. We salute you, saints, believers in Caesar's household. The only time that we see Paul in Caesar's household, in and around government officials and family, is when he is in bonds right here in Philippians chapter 1, verse 13. How about you? Take a look at your detour. You know what? I bet your detour in your life has it either increased somebody else's faith as you've weathered that storm, as you've been through that difficulty, or it's even maybe possibly brought somebody to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ as you've weathered that storm. Can anybody else testify to that? You've went through a difficulty knowing that God was with you, and now you're looking hindsight, and it's 2020, and you say that detour was inconvenient for you, but you know of other people that have gotten help in that detour. I can think of some. I know I can. And Paul is happy. I love that. You know, I think it's this maybe situation that he's thinking about when he says this statement. I now glory in my infirmities. He says, man, every time that something negative happens to me, something good happens for the glory of God. He says, so now, it's like I glory in these things. These difficulties have come my way. And a church is planted. Difficulties have come my way. A jailer and his family is saved, and another church is started. Difficulties have come my way. Now I find myself in Caesar's palace. Not the casino in Vegas, but Caesar's palace. And Paul, being the preacher that he is, undoubtedly had opportunities to have conversation and talk, or even simply just a testimony of who he was and how he lived, made people think and question, man, why is this guy really in here? He's not a criminal. He's done nothing wrong. Why does the government want to silence him? I wonder what's going on here. And so he's learning that sometimes detours can actually give us a new access that we never would have had before. You know, I think of my detours, and as I set out to be a business major, and then God called me into the ministry, and then I go away, I move away, and I go down to Georgia, and I'm in Bible college, and then right after Bible college, there was no doors opening up for me in ministry at that point, and I took a job in law enforcement. It was a detour I needed to have. God wanted me to see man in his depraved state. God wanted me to see, hey, these people need the gospel. Look at this. I mean, things you wouldn't believe, things you couldn't imagine. God allowed me a detour of having my own construction business and running things and getting to experience some things and purchase things and realize that none of it mattered, and only what was going to be done for Christ was going to last. And so I don't know about you, but I've taken detours. They've made me aware of things, and oftentimes those detours have given me access to things that I wouldn't have had access to before. This word is spreading like wildfire. The church is growing. Paul says the gospel is being furthered, and it's all because of detours. What about you? Is there a detour in your life? Maybe you got bitter to God about it. Maybe you've got angry over it. Maybe you've been questioning. Maybe doubt has crept in. He can't just be the God of the mountaintop. He's God of everything, or he's no God at all. And I'm just here to tell you, he is God of all. He's God of everything. Isaiah 58, he guides us continually. He will never leave us nor forsake us. God can work in these detours in our life. God had Paul here for a reason. You know, sometimes why God puts us in these detour situations, Peter writes about it. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 15, Peter says this, "For so is the will of God, that with well-doing he may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men." That's what Paul's doing right now. Paul is being faithful, and he's doing what he's supposed to do, and he is silencing those ones that had him persecuted, that had him put in jail, because the church is exploding to the point that people in the Roman government are coming to trust Christ. So he's actually silencing them by the things that he does. For it is the will of God that with well-doing we put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. In these detours, Paul said, number one, I've gained a new awareness. He says, number two, I've learned that I have a new access. Number three, he says, I now have a new assurance. Look at verse 14. "And many of the brethren in the Lord, waxing confident by my bonds, are much more bold to speak the word without fear." He's got a new assurance. Hey, newsflash, God takes care of his people. The good shepherd thing, it's not a joke. It's not a fairy tale. He is the good shepherd. When David said this, "I have never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread," guess what? He knew it because he experienced it. And as Paul is in this detour, it's actually strengthening his faith and his resolve. He is now gaining a more assurance of his calling. He's gaining assurance of who God is. He's getting assurance of God's promises. He's getting assurance that God's word indeed is true. And none of that would have happened without the detour. None of it. Paul's saying, I now have new assurance. Not just Paul. I've talked about Paul. What did the verse say? Let's read it again. Verse 14. "And many of the brethren in the Lord, waxing confident by my bonds, are now much more bold to speak the word without fear." Paul says, because of my situation, others have been assured about the existence of God and his grace and mercy. And now they're preaching bolder. They're preaching more. They're testifying more. They're spreading the word more. They're reaching more souls. All because of my detour. He says, there's a new assurance, and it's spread. I have a new assurance within me of who God is. But others seeing me go through this, their faith was strengthened. They now have insurance. This is real. This is real, guys. And the people in town were talking, and the new believers were now becoming more bold. The government thought they would be less bold. Let's take away Paul. Let's take away this teacher. When he's done, those people will crumble. Not how that detour worked. They took away Paul, and it said they became more bold. They began to preach more, and the church began to grow. When we go through detours, we can have a new assurance. We gain new things, a new assurance. Sometimes in life, don't we just need a little assurance? You ever been in a situation where you needed to see somebody else go through something so you could do it yourself? Well, we went to Summersville Campground this summer at Mountain Lake Campground. We were jumping off these big rocks. This is where all the moms and grandmoms in the house are like, why would you say that? We did. Yeah, we jumped off really high rocks. So did my daughters. But you see, they weren't quite sure about that jumping off the rock until Crazy Dad got up there and he jumped off the rock and come out of the water. Woo! It was so fun. Then, man, they were dying to get out of those kayaks and climb up on that rock and jump out. You know what? They saw something. It was real and it was genuine, and it gave them the assurance they needed to experience it themselves. And that's exactly what's happening with Paul. Paul was going through a situation. He started preaching the gospel. Now he's in jail. So the others that were preaching was like, But now that he's in jail, like, woo, the gospel's getting further. God is real. This is great. Man, I've got to go to the palace, verse 13, other places too. The gospel's spreading and the church is growing. Then other people got bold and they started jumping into, we want some of that too. There's a new assurance. We can be assured not because of who we are, but because of God, who God is. Matthew 19:26. But Jesus beheld them and said unto them, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. You can have that assurance in your detour, in the path that you weren't planning to travel, in that situation and in that difficulty. You can have an assurance of who God is and what he wants to do for you. Isaiah 41:10, fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. We can gain a new and stronger assurance in our details. As Paul is hearing, he's getting reports about other Christians are now having boldness, then he's getting more bold, and his assurance is growing and it's getting stronger. And as it grows and gets stronger, the people outside of where Paul is hearing of it, and they're getting stronger. And the Bible says that as iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. And they're supporting each other and they're lifting people up only because somebody went through a detour. And God was proved exactly who he said he was. Strong, mighty, and a help. Paul's got a new assurance of God's will, an assurance of God's plan, an assurance of his safety. And I don't know what assurance that you need in your storm, in your difficulty, in your detour tonight. But I know one thing. God's not slack concerning his promises. Aren't you glad that we can have assurance even in our detours? Look, lastly, so Paul he writes his letter. He gives them some goals in chapter 1. And then in verse 12 he says, but there'll be some detours. By the way, I'm in jail again, guys. But it's not bad. Let me tell you what's going on. Yeah, I got arrested again for doing the right thing. Let me tell you what's going on. In life, you're going to have detours. He says, I've gained a new awareness. It's been a blessing. I've got access to things I've never had before. I've got an assurance in my Creator and Sustainer and Provider. But he also said, I've got a new ambition. You ever been through a detour in life, and when you came out of it, you were a different person? Maybe you got a new ambition. Maybe you were one of those heart attack survivors that they say come out a different person. They went through a detour in life, and it changed them. There's maybe a new ambition, a new goal that they wouldn't have had if it wouldn't have been for that difficulty. And Paul's no different. And in 15 through 17, he talks about his profession, preaching. He's got an ambition to get out there and do it again, and we'll see why. Look at verse 15. So we just read, many of the brethren are waxing confident. And then 15, it says, some indeed preach Christ, even of envy and strife, and some also of goodwill. The one preached Christ of contention, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my bonds, but the other of love, knowing that I am set for the defense of the gospel. Paul has a new ambition. You know what? The best thing about a detour is sometimes when it's over. Now, we can talk about all these good things that are gained in our spiritual detours, our physical detours, but ultimately, we're glad when we get back on the path that we're familiar with. The path that is where we wanted to go. I mean, that's the best thing about a detour is when you see the sign that says, road work has ended. Hallelujah. Cruise control, resume. You know, let's get back to doing things like we were doing. When you do that, your path becomes appreciated, right? You really appreciate 2 lanes on the interstate after you've been in 1 lane for about 5 miles, right? You're like, praise God. Y'all get over there. I know it's just me. Hammer down. Y'all get over there. Get over there. I want a dry erase board in my truck so I can send people messages. If I could just write one, I'd write cruise control. Just the words cruise control. You ever been taking a long trip and there's that red car? Okay? You pass that red car because they're doing 60 in a 70. You pass that red car, you see me get back over. 5 minutes later, that red car blows your door off at 80 miles an hour. Okay. 5 minutes later, look who's in the right lane again. You're passing. The red car doing 60 miles an hour. So you have to signal, get over, and that's repetitive. And it's just like, use the cruise control. I mean, just use the cruise control. It has nothing to do with any type of application. That's not an illustration for that point at all. That has to do with driving. If you have cruise control, make sure you use that. But Paul has a new ambition. When he's getting off his detour, his path that he was on was much more appreciated. What was his path? He's a preacher. He's a man separated and called out from God to preach the gospel. And Paul's ambition is now, I want to go back to preaching the gospel. And, us too, we go through a spiritual detour. When God speaks through us and in us during a difficulty, when we come out of it, oftentimes you'll immediately want to serve the Lord. What can I do? I've experienced that. Some of you have been through situations. You come to me, Ray, I want to do something. Where can I be involved in? Where can I serve at? That is just only natural. As we come through a God-ordained detour and we learn the things that God had for us in that detour, oftentimes that's followed by a new ambition. And that's what Paul wants to do. Man, I want to get back on this path. What did God want me to get from this? Man, I want to get back there and preach. I've got a boldness now. I've got an awareness. I've got new accents. I've got an assurance. Paul wants to preach. But you know what? The devil fights back. Does he not? We get out there with ambition, and then the devil wants to nail us flat, right? We'll take a few steps forward, then something happens, and we're a few steps back. Look what Paul says right here. He says in verse 15, he said, some indeed preach Christ, even of envy and strife. Sadly, this is not talking about Paul's friends. This is talking about the Judaizers. They're seizing this opportunity as Paul is being away in prison to spread a bunch of trash and a bunch of lies about Paul and the Christ that he was preaching. And they're trying, while he's not here, while he's not vocal, and while he's not drawing this big crowd like he did, we're going to tear him down. We're going to tear him down. And Paul's in there itching, I got to get back out there. I've got to get back out there. Sometimes our detours can give us a new ambition. And I pray that we'll seize them. And he says now, hey, some of them are preaching with goodwill. Those are his friends. And look at verse 16. And he goes back to another one. Then one preached Christ of contention. And once again, that goes back to the Judaizers, those that are still hung up on these traditions and the Mosaic laws, and that this is not Jesus Christ. The crowd that is going to that was shouting, "Crucify him!" That crowd gets their venom in, and he says all they wanted to do is say something to bring contention. You know, they wanted to seize an opportunity to cause division in the church. And then it goes on to say, and to add affliction to my bonds, and to hurt me personally. Paul says, I've got to get back out there. They need to hear the right thing. Guys, the world needs to hear, and the world needs to see the right thing. And you might be down. You might be experiencing a detour in life. You might be experiencing a difficulty that you didn't plan for, that you didn't expect. Man, I hope in that you found some ambition. That when you get back on the road that you were planning to be on, that you'll have a new drive to do the right thing, to spread God's word, by being an example of the believers, by inviting folks to church, by sharing your faith. And I don't know what God's plan is for you that you should be ambitious about, but it was revealed to you in your detour. I don't know. I've had different detours than you have. Paul had a different detour than I have, and you have one different than she has, and she has one different than you have. But God speaks to us in those seasons of life, in those detours. And I don't know what it is, but I know we need to obey. I know God would have us to come out stronger and better for it when we come through those difficulties with His help. There's a message to be preached. God is going to get Paul back on his path, and he's got some things to address. There were some things he would have never seen without this other stuff. I mean, I'm sorry, my humanity, sometimes I try to put myself in Paul's shoes. Can I be honest with you? I ask myself, why? Shipwrecked a few times, beaten with rods, stoned, doing God's will and being arrested. Man, I don't know if I could have been that strong. I mean, I might lump some of y'all in that group too, because we're real guilty about saying God's will with our feelings. Oh, well, my feelings are hurt. Me doing that must not be God's will. I'm out. You know, if Paul would have approached those situations with that mentality, he wouldn't have experienced the things that he experienced, and the gospel would not have been furthered, and these preachers wouldn't have been as bold, and the church wouldn't have gone through that rapid stage of growth. What did he have to do? He just had to stay focused on God during the detours in life and trust that He was in control. With every head bowed and with every eye closed,